Salim, back in 1787, Benjamin Franklin, coming out of Independence Hall, was asked by a lady, "Well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" And he said, "A republic if you can keep it." And it looks as if it is on shaky ground with President Trump's term of office, because the Obama administration, with Hillary Clinton pulling the strings, and John Brennan and the FBI and the deep state as her puppets, have tried their darndest to overturn the duly elected President of the United States and this administration. And if that hasn't hit home to a lot of people, I would direct them to a documentary that was just released called The Plot Against the President, which interviews all the key players, mostly on the Republican side, of course, because the Democrats and the perpetrators of the hoax, the Russian collusion hoax, wouldn't tell the truth if they were asked. But it puts into a great perspective, in about an hour and a half documentary, this entire coup, or an attempted coup, by the deep state, by Hillary Clinton's puppets, with the aid of Obama. And the notion that the United States can keep its republic is in jeopardy. You saw during the vice presidential debate between Pence and Harris, Harris continually calling the United States the democracy. You know, let's save our democracy. And it's not a democracy. There are elements of the democracy in the United States, in that people can elect their representatives. It is a representative democracy, not a true democracy. It is a republic, a constitutional republic with a constitution that protects people's individual rights. And Nancy Pelosi, the deep state, Hillary Clinton, Obama's ghost, are trying their darndest to override the Constitution, override people's individual rights, and destroy the republic. We're 3 weeks away from the election, Salim. What are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, I mean, you began by citing that famous exchange between Benjamin Franklin and the lady, I believe, in Philadelphia after they had come out, or Benjamin Franklin had come out from the sitting of the Constitutional Convention that was taking place in Philadelphia, the city of the Liberty Bell. And as you are absolutely right, I mean, some 240 plus years later, the issue in this election, 2020, is whether the Republic will be saved or the Republic will become what, again, as you are reminding us from the debate with the vice presidential debate with Vice President Mike Pence and Senator Kamala Harris, the Democrat nominee for the vice president. The repeated use of the word democracy and the whole idea that the Democrats have been spreading for the last so many years through the media, through the academia, and so on and so forth, that America is a democracy. And here, if I might take a moment to clarify the issue, you're right, America is not a democracy. A democracy is, by definition, a people's regime in which it is a majoritarian rule. The party or the individual that has the majority support, 50 plus 1, can direct the affairs of that polity, that state, in the direction that the majority wants to go. America is not a democracy in that sense. The only aspect of democracy that is in America is, as you correctly point out, the people elect their representative. And so America is a representative government elected by the people, for the people, and of the people, as Abraham Lincoln so famously said. What America is a republic. That means it is a constitutional order. This is so important for people to understand. It's a constitutional order. America is a republic based upon a document, the US Constitution, which lays out the rules of how Washington, how the United States will be governed. It is a document that spells out the separation of powers, you know. So power is not concentrated in one hand or one political party as it is in a democracy. Canada, in that sense, is a democracy, and we can see what is happening with the Justin Trudeau government. They're just directing this country in a direction, especially when it comes to spending, without the mandate that they have. And so, yeah, we are a democracy, Canada, and not the United States. But coming back to what I think of it, of this election, which is, by the way, exactly as we speak, exactly 3 weeks from today, that the American people, voting has already started, but the day that most Americans will go to the poll in person to vote, November the 3rd, 3 weeks away. And as President Trump has repeatedly pointed out during his campaigns, that this election, the 2020 election, is the most important election in the history of America, and is similar to the election of 1860, when Abraham Lincoln was elected president and the South seceded, leading to the Civil War. This election is not about civil war, that if President Trump is not re-elected, there is going to be a civil war breakout. That might happen. There might be violence in the street. But this election is about, as again, you point out very correctly, if President Trump is not re-elected, America is headed to become a post-constitutional order, a post-Republican government. Again, it will become, in that sense, a democracy, a majoritarian rule, which is precisely what the Democrats have been working at for so many years. That's the progressive agenda. That comes out when you hear about them talking about packing the Supreme Court, you know, which in effect means the Supreme Court will no longer be, as per the Constitution, the third arm of the separation of power, that is independent judiciary. It will become a super legislature. That is, the legislation that the Democrats cannot pass in an election or have the majority in the Congress to pass, they can pass it through the Supreme Court, as the Supreme Court, for instance, discovered that the Obamacare mandate was simply a tax, and therefore Obamacare could be passed, you know, and the Obamacare mandate was not a tax. It was a compulsion upon the American people to pay out for something which they hadn't voted for.
And ironically, it was a Republican, Roberts, who sided with that.
That's right. So, I mean, that is another story why Roberts did that. But, you know, it would have been a 5-4 split going, or 6-3 split going into that Supreme Court decision if Robert hadn't broken the way he broke. But you saw that, getting back into that vote, I mean, as a diversion, Anthony Scalia, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, they voted against the Obamacare on the basis of the mandate. But John Roberts, who was supposed to be a conservative judge appointed by George W. Bush, went against and voted with the Democrats and gave the Democrats their Obamacare bill that they had been pushing for. Just like more than almost 50 years ago, Roe versus Wade, the most controversial act that was passed, and the Supreme Court held it, was that the justices, the liberal justices, discovered the right of a woman to have her abortion if she wanted. There's no such right. There was nothing in the Constitution. So they invented a right, the right for the woman to have an abortion, that is to be autonomous and control her body. Before the Roe versus Wade, the issue about abortion, as was in Canada, but in the United States, it was an issue to be decided by the states, and it was within the states. And different states, in America is 50 states, it is not one size fits all. That's what a federation is. That's what the United States of America is. States have their own government, their own constitution. And so what was okay or permissible, legal, in California, for instance, was possibly not legal in Texas or some of the other southern states. Just as, for instance, before the civil rights movement changed and brought about the end to desegregation or segregation, beginning with the judgment of the Brown versus education in the famous decision during the Eisenhower year, when Black children could go to white schools, in that famous scene that you possibly have seen in Little Rock, Arkansas. President Eisenhower sent, the U.S. Airborne Division 101 to protect the Black girl from attending to go into the school. So Arkansas had a separate school system, but it went against the decision of the Supreme Court, because that was a decision the Supreme Court came down with. So on the question of Roe versus Wade and abortion, the appeal of the case went to the Supreme Court, and so the Supreme Court decision is, whatever the decision is, to unify and make one law for all of the 50 states, and therefore take away the jurisdiction of the individual Supreme Courts in individual states.
Let's get back, if we could, to the destruction of the Republic by the Democrats and the Russian collusion hoax, the impeachment hoax, the complicity of the media and the deep state. Can this Republic survive?
Yeah, but the point is, the Democrats have been moving in the direction to create or make permanent their goal of a post-constitutional order. If you pack the Supreme Court, there goes the separation of power.
Well, yes. As a matter of fact, if the Dems pack the Supreme Court and then the Republicans get in next term, they could pack the Supreme Court too. And it goes on in a vicious cycle of packing the Supreme Court until, whichever party is in power gets their way.
But that's exactly the point it is. The elected body in the American constitutional system is the president, who's elected by every American. That's the only national election that happens. And then the Congress, but the Congress is not a national election. The House of Representatives are elected. Members of the House are elected by the electoral districts, the 435 electoral districts across America. And the senators are elected by the state, the voters in the state. They elect 2 senators for each of the states.
And that's only recent as well, because there was a time, not in living memory, when most of the senators were appointed by states, legislatures.
Well, that's exactly what it is. In 1913, just before World War I, the amendment was brought, the 17th Amendment was brought, and the senators were to be then, after the 17th Amendment was passed, to be elected openly by the people. And in that sense, it changed the balance between the states, each individual states, and Washington, because now the senators were no longer representative of the states. They were representatives of the people who were electing them. So there you have it, the blue state, the red state, that is America's, diverse political culture. The senators are no longer appointed by the state assembly. They're elected by the people, and it is the people then, in that sense, that the senators are responsible for. And you can buy the senator, there's no, the vote. And therefore, there's no term limit. They put a term limit on the president. Roosevelt was elected 4 times. They put a term limit after Roosevelt's election. The 22nd Amendment, the president would be limited to 2 terms, even though the precedent was established of a 2-term presidency by the first president, the father of the nation, George Washington. He could have been elected for lifetime. But after 2 elections, he retired, and he set the precedent. And from Washington to Roosevelt, Roosevelt was the 33rd president. From Washington to Roosevelt, 32 presidents had all been by precedent limited to 2 terms.
As a matter of fact, I'm glad you brought up Washington, because I was reading a biography of John Adams, and I think it was John Adams at the time who, when Washington stepped down, was relieved, because this was the first time in history of the world, as far as we know, that a ruler stepped aside according to the Constitution. And that's when the Republic was really born, because it showed that it was not a monarchy. Washington did not make himself a king, as he could have easily done. And now we see, though, with Obama, that he has put himself in the position of a king. He's kicking and screaming, trying to overturn the presidency of the President of the United States, sitting duly elected, with the complicity of the lower house and Pelosi and the failed Hillary Clinton. So there's this thread of monarchy starting to creep its way into the United States with the Obama era.
Well, the facade of a monarchy, you might say, or you might also talk about the dynastic idea. I mean, George Herbert Walker Bush was the 41st president, and his son became the 43rd president. You know, in American history, I think there's only 2 father and son presidency. There's John Adams, who was the 2nd president, and John Quincy Adams. I think he was the 6th president, his son. And so, you know, the whole notion of dynasty. I mean, if Hillary Clinton had won in 2016, back again, that this issue then arises. Her husband was the president, and then she was picking up not only being the 3rd term for Obama, but she would, again, the dynasty would continue, and maybe you would have Chelsea Clinton then running, you know, for the Democrats. But coming back to George Washington and moving forward, there is nothing in the Constitution until the 22nd Amendment was passed. That was, I believe, in 1950, 51, something in that time period was passed. There was no term limit for the presidency. It was a practice. It was a precedent. And the greatness of George Washington was and is that George Washington was the most beloved and above reproach American of his generation. Napoleon, in exile in St. Helena, writing his memoir, the story goes, you know, there are different interpretations of it, but the story goes that Napoleon was asked, you know, about his situation. He had been the general, he had been, in a sense, the conqueror of Europe. He had become the emperor, and now he was a prisoner in a little rock in St. Helena. And whom did he admire most? And what would he like to be? And he's supposed to have said, George Washington was the most admirable man of his generation. They were contemporaries. And the reason was obvious. You know, George Washington could have been the monarch. I mean, the American Revolution was against King George III. No taxation without representation. And they had won and they defeated the British in the colonies. And George Washington could have been the next emperor or the king. But he was a man who was a farmer, who had served in the army, and who then sat in the Constitutional Convention as the chair, was elected in 1792, and then retired, you know, after 2 terms in 1800. Interestingly, John Adams, who was relieved, as you point out, from, you know, that George Washington had stepped down, he became president in the 1800 election, the 2nd president. But he was confronted with immense opposition by Thomas Jefferson, and that was a very bitterly fought election of 1804, no holds barred election of 1804, in which John Adams was defeated by Thomas Jefferson, who had served as the Secretary of State under George Washington. These are fascinating historical anecdotes and example of how the American Republic evolved over time. And where we have arrived is exactly what you're talking about, that what President Eisenhower had warned in 1960 on his end of his presidency, the American people to be aware of, warn them against the power of the rising and the influence of the rising military-industrial complex. Part of the military-industrial complex is not only the men in the uniform, it is the entire set of intelligence agencies that came into being through the Second World War, and then after the Second World War, during the Cold War, and today there's something like 17 intelligence agencies in America, the CIA, the FBI, the DNI, the military intelligence, and so on and so forth. Basically looking into not only America's adversaries or people abroad, but can surveil every American citizen, to how they brush their teeth, what magazines they buy and read, where they shop, and so on and so forth. So it is totally a surveillance society it has become as a result of the intelligence agency. That is the deep state. And the elected members in Washington has become the ruling class. It has become a uniparty state. And that's what we're talking about, the establishment. It doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican. It is an establishment. You have people like Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House today, who has been in office for 44 years. You've had senators who have been there for half a century. This is what it is. It is no longer George Washington being elected twice and then going back to his farm.
There's one thing about
permanent feature.
There's one thing about this particular election that I've been noticing, and more recent elections as well, and that is the tenacity of the Democrats, the tenacity of the deep state. They use every single weapon at their disposal to try to further their own little fiefdom and their corruption. And the latest items of that nature are the mail-in ballots, which we've seen, if you're following at least on social media, not so much in the mainstream media, which are ignoring these things, but social media, you see so many examples of mail-in ballots being destroyed by corrupt postal workers. And if it's not the mail-in ballots, then it's now this setting up of a committee to look into the effectiveness or of the president under the 25th Amendment and his mental capacity. Pelosi says it's for all presidents, but of course she's using it for Donald Trump. And there are other elements as well, the impeachment, stacking the Supreme Court. All of these elements are coming together by these tenacious honey badgers of the Democrats who should be matched by the Republicans, but the Republicans are too decent sometimes to actually use the tools at their disposal to fight their enemies. So with this election looming in 3 weeks, Salim, and all of these factors in play, what are your predictions for the election?
Well, I believe that President Trump will win.
You were one of the very few people who said that he would win in 2016 as well, or win the first election.
This is where I'm coming down to. The difference between 2016 election and 2020 election is in many ways profound. The 2016 election, Trump's candidacy, Trump was the outsider. a businessman who had never been elected as a dog catcher, who put his hat in the ring for the Republican nomination against 16 or 17 other contenders. And among them, there were senators and congressmen and congresswomen and businessmen or people in business, but who had been governors. All of them, in that sense, were professional politicians, except for Donald Trump and Ben Carson, the black American neurosurgeon who ran and now is the secretary, I believe, of housing in the Trump administration. And that woman from California, Carly Fiorina, if I remember the name correctly, who had been the president of HP, Hewlett Packard in California, and she ran. So Trump won against all of them and became the nominee. And nobody that is in the media and in the academia expected that Trump would win. In fact, way into the last week of the campaign, Hillary, if you recall, was leading by double digit in the opinion poll. Trump lost the popular vote. Trump is not the first president to lose the popular vote, but win the electoral college vote. This is, again, something that the Democrats want to change. And that would mean no more a Republican system. It will become a majoritarian rule. All you would need to do is win California, which has in effect become a one-party state, and New York, and Illinois, and the blue state, but principally California and New York, and you have the popular vote in your column. So President Trump won the election and surprised everybody in that sense. The 2020 election is not going to be a surprise because now the deep state, unlike 2016, the media, the academia, the global oligarchs, in fact, it is everybody, just about everybody against Trump. That is the common American, especially the American in the red states, who are voting for Trump. Everybody you can think of. I mean, here in Canada, I think if you take a vote in Canada, because the American election has profound consequences for Canada, I would imagine more than 80% of the people in Canada would be voting against Trump. I haven't seen any of the major media in Canada. In fact, all of the corporate media is overwhelmingly anti-Trump. It basically repeats the talking point of the Democrats. So it is not going to be a surprise. It is not a surprise for the people who are opposed to it, because Trump was about taking away power from the uniparty system that had emerged, the ruling class in America. An American system, instead of being a Republican order, was becoming a post-Republican order in which the people vote. And here's the critical point. People vote. But whoever they vote for doesn't matter, because it is the same class of people that runs the government. So voting is one thing, totally disconnected from effectively who runs Washington. And Washington is run by a ruling class, which is a closed circle, an incestuous loop. And it feeds itself, against the rest of the country. So here you have people voting, and America is a Potemkin village run by Washington. It doesn't matter. Give you one example, a very important example. The President of the United States is the Commander-in-Chief and is the Chief Executive. He's not the Chief Legislator. He is the Chief Executive, he's the head of state, and he's the Commander-in-Chief. So people are voting for the President to defend America. American security comes first and foremost on an issue of war and peace. President Trump is the first post-1945 president who ran in 2016 on the argument that it is time to end all the unnecessary, endless wars, to bring the wars to an end and bring back American soldiers home. He would rebuild the American armed forces and make it the strongest armed forces in the world, which is what America which is responsibly supposed to be, or has been, at least since 1945. But that is not sending American men and women, young men and women, to an endless war to feed the endless appetite of the military-industrial complex. Today, what we have is some of the leading generals in the American armed forces, in the Pentagon, whether they're serving or retired, who are appalled and who are opposing President Trump to end the war, to bring back soldiers, say, from Afghanistan, that has been the longest war that America has been engaged in, you know. And all of these wars that America has been fighting has been inconclusive. There has been no end to it. So there you have it. What President Eisenhower warned had become a reality. The American people don't want to go into an endless war, but it is, again, the military-industrial complex that needs the war to feed its appetite, the politicians who make money out of it, and so on and so forth. So what has happened? I mean, in the last debate, possibly it will be the only debate. I don't know whether there will be another debate, because the second debate was canceled because the debate commission wanted to have a virtual debate, which is to put Joe Biden, Vice President Biden, in his basement with computers through which possibly he would be fed the answers, debating President Trump. And President Trump very correctly said, no, he wants to debate Biden face to face. And therefore that debate has been canceled. So in the only debate that has taken so far, the issue of accepting the result was posed to President Trump by Chris Wallace. And everybody who saw the debate saw that Chris Wallace was nothing but a Democrat hack. He was not an independent, objective moderator. He was a Democrat hack, defending, in a sense, protecting Biden from answering the question whether it was about court packing or about the corruptions with the Ukrainian government giving Biden and his son millions and millions of dollars, or the Chinese, giving Biden, while he was vice president, over $1 billion, etc. And then this question was posed by Chris Wallace: would President accept the election result? Would there be a fair transition, a peaceful transition? Biden jumped in and he said that he would accept the result, whichever is the result. And if he did not win, he would accept it. And if he won the election, he would hope that there would be a peaceful transition. In other words, that President Trump would accept the result. To which then President Trump turned around and answered. And so let me, for the record of our discussion, read to you the answer, because I printed it out from his transcript, and it is very revealing. This is what President Trump said to both Biden and Chris Wallace, and of course to the American public. He said, there was no transition because they came after me trying to do a coup. They came after me spying on my campaign. They started from the day I won, and even before I won, the winning is, that is the primary. From the day I came down the escalator with our First Lady, they were a disaster. They were a disgrace to our country, and we caught them. We've caught them all. We've got it all on tape. We've caught them all. In other words, it is the Democrats who are talking about peaceful transition, never accepted the result of the 2016 election. In fact, before the election, as President Trump pointed out, and now we know, as all the documents are coming out and we can read them, it was President Obama, Vice President Biden, who approved the activity of the intelligence agencies to engage in surveilling Donald Trump's campaign, in bringing in the warrants from the FISA court, the Foreign Intelligence Service court, to surveil Carter Page and George Papadopoulos and to catch them and through them to smear Trump that he was a Russian agent, a story that was planted by Hillary Clinton. And the Steele dossier, that is Christopher Steele, an MI6 British spy, a Russian specialist who spun these fabulous stories about President Trump and his connection with the Russian, that is Vladimir Putin, all hoax, all false, but it was created and the dossier was then passed on to Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton's campaign then hired, so it is Hillary Clinton's campaign money that hired Fusion GPS. And the people of Fusion GPS, a opposition research group in Washington, to use that Christopher Steele document and to push that document into the media as if the media needed any special pushing, but anyhow to push the document. And that became then the story about Trump-Russia hoax, which led to the special counsel, almost 2.5 years of president's administration. He was hampered, his hand was tied behind the back. That eventually led to the impeachment over the Ukrainian issue. So it is a Democrat and the Democratic Party and Obama himself who engaged in trying to delegitimize the November 2016 election, and then after the election to create the story, the smear, the allegation that Trump had stolen the election with the help of Vladimir Putin, and then to oust him from the White House, So that happened, and the 4 years of President Trump's first term in office has been a 24/7 effort to basically survive this coordinated attack upon his presidency. Now, the American public should know about all of these things by now, but, the classic story of coup is the coup makers always seize hold of the communication network of the country where the coup is taking place, whether it is in Latin America, whether it is in the Middle East, whether it is in Asia. The first thing, whether it's a military coup or a political coup, the Bolsheviks in Russia in 1917, the first target of the coup makers is to get a hold of, seize the radio station, in our time the television station, and the written press, to take hold of it and then to broadcast their messages. Well, what has happened in America? The entire corporate media, New York Times, Washington Post, the electronic media, MSNBC, CNN, and the whole lot of them, including Fox now, have been basically a Democrat talking point.
Just to hit that home with the social media, Salim, at the beginning of this talk, I suggested people go and have a look at the plot against the president. Now, you can actually purchase it, stream it, but I followed a link. A friend of ours sent a link to us, and it was on BitChute. Now, the link was on Twitter, so I clicked on the link on Twitter, and what pops up, except a warning by Twitter that the site I'm about to go to, BitChute, is suspiciously dangerous. And of course it's not. What they've done is they've put up this warning to prevent some people from clicking and watching this particular video.
If Hillary had won in 2016, here's a thought with which we might end this conversation. You and I and 330 million Americans, apart from those who specialize and who dig into politics and history in a forensic manner that sometimes you and I have done, apart from that small segment of people, nobody would know the depth of the deep state, the transformation of America that had already taken place into a uni-party system with people in Washington, that is the elected representatives, sitting there as if it is their entitlement for half a century, senators and congressmen and women, and the government being run by the permanent bureaucracy, the military-industrial complex, the intelligence agencies, the IRS, and crony capitalism. Crony capitalism is, again, look at it. What is crony? It is quid pro quo. What was the accusation made against Trump by the Democrats when they brought the impeachment, that his phone call was a quid pro quo? It was nothing of that sort. The quid pro quo was Vice President Biden going to Ukraine and saying, if you don't fire the Attorney General, you're not going to get the money. The $1 billion that was at stake, To fire the Attorney General was to let Burisma give the money to his son. And when the conversation took place, and these are all on official record, Biden boasted when he sat down with the Council of Foreign Relations in New York about that event. He boasted that the Ukrainian official said, well, you are vice president, does this have the approval of people in Washington? In other words, Obama. And Biden said, well, you call Washington, call Obama. In other words, Biden implicated Obama. That is crony capitalism, because what qualification does Hunter Biden have to be on the board of Burisma as an energy expert? What qualification or investment or understanding of business that Biden's son, Hunter Biden, has, that the Chinese government was willing to invest $1 billion into this fake company that Hunter Biden and John Kerry's son, through his wife, Mrs. Hines, that is his stepson, established, so that the Chinese would then have a control over the Democratic administration.
Thank you, Salim.
Thank you.